Max, Program Manager for the California Opioid Safety Network at the Center for Health Leadership and Practice, a program of the Public Health Institute. You are about to watch a video that has been condensed from its original format to equip you with 8 tips for telling a story with your data. The subject matter expert is Andy Krakoff, President of Hillcrest Advisory. Let's get started.
This is really focused on the communication of data. So this isn't going to be about finding the data or analyzing the data. It's going to assume to some degree that you've got the data you need. First of all, anyone know who these 3 musicians are? Crosby, Stills, and Nash. And you might wonder, what would they possibly have to do with data and data storytelling? A long time ago when I was working with folks at CHIS at UCLA, a person there had a wonderful quote that if you can't be with the data you love the data you're with. Obviously a takeoff on their song, if you can't be with the one you love the one you're with. You know, looking for some data. Perfectly understandable, makes a lot of sense. But I'd also just want you to keep in mind, don't wait for that perfect data set to appear. It might not be there. You might not have the racial and ethnic breakdowns you need. You may not have the geographic granularity you need yet, perhaps, but you have some data. And it's best, I think, to start with something. So I think that's the first lesson that I would, keep in mind. So the second one, and we're going to have a few that build on this concept, and this is the notion of how important it is these days to tell data stories and not just focus on creating a map or a graph or something along those lines. A lot of work is taking place these days to paint data on a broader canvas where you can bring together photos and contextual information and videos and things along those lines. And I'm going to share with you one example that I think is really nicely done along these lines. This has nifty ways of animating the data and nice visualizations, but I actually don't want you to focus on that. What I really like about this is the text that they have scrolling off to the left on the left side. I like that they have these pithy questions. How much more? And they have a short condensed summary, of that particular graph. Not too long, very short, and the narrative guides you through this information nicely. So what's causing all of this spending? And it shows you, are Americans engaging in more healthcare activities? This is one example. We're going to look at some others. This is one example of a data story, and I think it sort of helps make that point about painting the data on this broader canvas. It's not just about the graph itself. This is building on that last lesson of data storytelling, how important that is. The last example I showed you, it wasn't really focused on, there wasn't a lot of emotion there. It was a very intellectual sharing of the data. Perfectly fine, you can do that. What I like about this next one I'm going to show is it is an example of appealing to both the heart and the head. I think it's really vital to use both to inform decision making. The point here is our brains are wired for stories. Some people that you want to reach are going to be taken by a personal story that you may want to share. That's fine to use. I think we often think, there's a story, and then siloed off from that is the data. And I actually don't think it needs to be that way, not at all. I think it is perfectly fine to use both. So let me show you an example. This is one, it's actually one that I've been working on recently for another client. We're basically telling a story here. Lucia is generally unstoppable as the grandmother of a 4-year-old with special needs, and the story goes on. And as we're telling this story, and this is in the form of a fact sheet, a one-page front and back fact sheet, here's page 2, but as you can see, we're sprinkling in some data points, in this case about special education enrollment, and in this case about crowded housing in Long Beach. And we also provide a sense of solution. It gives a sense of an idealized solution of what this person's problem is, but also what can be done about that. And of course, let's not forget the fact that we have a poignant photo as well. These are the kinds of things, it could be quotes, it could be videos, but these things are perfectly fine to do. And if you are a data person, and you may not be, but if you are a data person who is focused on the data, largely speaking, you may not have incredible aptitude for the spoken word. And I speak here from experience of talking about this with, like, say, epidemiologists in California. Now, absolutely, there are some people who are really strong on the data and the analysis part that are also really good communicators. But the point here is to try and involve others who have the lived experience, who are really strong with communication. I think it's really good to involve a lot of different viewpoints, and especially those who can share, and help you tell your message in a really persuasive, crisp way. Just for purposes of time, I'm going to skip this example. And I mentioned this notion of telling your story in a crisp way, and I want to talk a little bit more about that. And let me show you an example. So here, where we work in the social sector, we often feel like we have so much to say. There's so much that's going on with, opioid misuse that we want to be able to say it all. But you got to keep in mind that people you want to reach may not necessarily be sitting at their computer. They may not really have the patience at that moment in time to read, say, a 50-page report or even a 10-page report. A couple of years ago, I worked on early stages of this work, and we played out this concept. So we started with a very simple teaser, a one-pager that would grab people's attention. It's like an envelope that you would open. Prescription opioids now kill more people than firearm homicides. How many people died from prescription opioid overdoses in your county? Again, we're just trying to grab people's attention. And then you click on a county. In this case, let's say it's Yolo County. And we had a longer report. This is in template form. It's not, a finished report. It's a longer document with lots of data, maps, and some graphs, some personal stories that counties could tailor to their own needs. But we didn't want to lead with this. We wanted to lead with something that would grab people's attention. And that's the point of this, of this lesson, adding depth incrementally. I want to talk about the opposite of this one, but let's first start with this one. It can be hard when you're trying to take a large number, and a large number could be in the thousands, to make it relatable to people, and that could be, say, ED visits, or the dosage for pharmaceuticals, for example. I know that's often the statistic that's used. And there was a cognitive psychologist, Paul Slovic, who had this nice way of summarizing this. If I look at the maths, he said, I will never act. And he was coming at it from the perspective of how we process information. And when you think about it, our brains are really not wired to understand really large numbers. We are more wired to understand the people that surround us, the 10, 15, 20 people that surround us. So there's been a lot of work done recently in how you can make large numbers more relatable. Here's one that comes to mind, that what if all the ice melted, talking about global warming here. And in this case, they took the estimated sea level rise of 7 meters, this is Reuters, and showed the size of a Reuters photographer. Again, trying to take something that feels very abstract and make it relatable. You guys are often in this position of having numbers, let's say, for deaths and such, where you have the opposite problem, where you have a small number perhaps. If you live in a rural county, you may not have that many deaths for opioid overdoses. There probably are multiple ways of expressing the data depending on what you're trying to say, and you can keep in mind that you may have too large a number or too small a number. I think it's really important to always talk to your users. It is actually perfectly acceptable to reach out to a parent or to whoever it may be and talk to them and say, well, how would you want this information presented? Would you, someone mentioned earlier social media, would you want this displayed digitally? Would you want this social media, or is it more likely that I'm going to be coming to a session at the school, in which case maybe I need a fact sheet or a presentation? And I do find that presentations, this is one example presentation, and fact sheets, here's a fact sheet from Kids Data, a one-page printed fact sheet front and back. These kinds of things work well. In fact, more often than not, for the local level work that I've been doing with folks around the state, I hear less about the need for digital dissemination. They want things that are going to be used for face-to-face communication, like a fact sheet, like a presentation. It's up to you, but the important thing is to talk to your users and get a sense of how they want the information packaged. This one on making data fun, this is the New York Times. Does this look familiar to anyone? And this is talking about deaths from overdose epidemics. They turned data into a game. The audience you selected, what do you want them to do with the data? Do you want them to change a practice or a process? Do you want them to pass legislation provide funding. You want to just raise their awareness. And on one hand, yes, that is an action, but I think it would be great if you can even take that next step of saying, raise awareness to do what? If it's a parent, you want to raise their awareness so that they can talk to their child and make sure their child perhaps understands the dangers or whatever it may be. So think about that, that raising awareness. It's better if you can think about it to what end.